Hello and welcome to this Come to Jesus Daily devotional. We continue in the book of Jonah. Today's meditation is entitled, The Gospel is Offensive. Let's read from Jonah 3:10 to chapter 4, verse 1. When God saw what they did and how they turned from their evil ways, He relented and did not bring on them the destruction he had threatened. But to Jonah this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. In summary, for many, the idea that God saves sinners by grace seems unjust. For many, the idea that God saves sinners by grace seems unjust. Jonah becomes angry because God has decided to spare the Ninevites. Once again, Jonah is running away from God, but this time in his attitude. Whilst God is showing mercy, Jonah is going the other way by becoming angry. Many people are like Jonah, and all of us have a bit of him still in us. We can believe that good individuals will go to heaven, that God will forgive those who have committed minor wrongs, but there is no hope for the worst offenders. Now, this perspective seems very logical, doesn't it? It's held by most people. Most religions have this idea that there's a hierarchy. If you are good, you go to be with God, you're accepted by Him, but if you're bad, you're not. However, it raises the question, doesn't it, as to who is good enough, and am I good enough? Recently, during an Alpha course session, I encountered a challenge from someone who argued that it was inappropriate for God to forgive a concentration camp guard who was used as an illustration about God's forgiveness. Now here's the story, a summary of the story that is in that particular session. In 1972, Corrie ten Boom, the author of The Hiding Place, survivor of a concentration camp, recounted a moment in 1947 when she was delivering a speech in Munich about God's unconditional forgiveness. She was personally challenged to the core in this issue. In her message, she had expressed, when we confess our sins, God casts them into the deepest ocean, gone forever. However, at the end of her talk, she recognized one of her former cruel guards from Ravensbrück concentration camp. He approached her. He complimented her on her message, and that it was so good that God had cast all of our sins to the bottom of the sea. And she said of her own feelings, I, who had spoken so glibly of forgiveness, fumbled in my pocketbook rather than shake the hand held out to her. I remembered him, leather crop swinging from his belt. It was the first time since my release that I had been face to face with one of my captors, and my blood seemed to freeze. He said to her, you mentioned Ravensbrück. I was a guard there. Since that time, he went on, that he had become a Christian. And I know, he said, that God has forgiven me for the cruel things I did there. But I would like to hear it from your lips as well, Fraulein, he said. Again, the hand came out. Will you forgive me? Well, you can imagine the challenge that would have been to her and to any one of us. I don't think it could be much worse, could it, than having to come face to face with that situation and decide whether or not to actually put into practice what we believe about forgiveness. She continues to recount, as I stood there, I whose sins had every day been forgiven and could not. Betsy, that's her sister, had died in that place. Could he erase her slow, terrible death simply by asking? It could not have been more than a few seconds as he stood there with his hand held out, but it seemed like hours as I wrestled with this most difficult thing I had ever had to do. For I had to do it, I knew that. The message that God forgives has a prior condition that we forgive those who have injured us. If we do not forgive men their trespasses, Jesus says, neither will your Father in heaven forgive you. She prayed, Jesus, help me. She said to herself, I can lift my hand, I can do that. You supply the feeling. And so woodenly, mechanically, I thrust my hand into the one stretched out to me. And as I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulder, raced down my arm, sprang into our joined hands, and then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. I forgive you, brother, I cried, with all my heart. For a long time we grasped each other's hands, the former guard and the former prisoner. I had never known God's love so intensely as I did then. This account challenges all of us, I'm sure. At this moment of great challenge to her belief in God's grace, Corrie had victory over the crouching Jonah in all of us. Paul writes about the sinful condition that we all come to him in Romans 5, 6-8. You see, at just the right time, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. We were powerless. We were ungodly. It's whilst we were sinners that Christ died for us. He died for us. The Holy One, the one without sin, came and died for us in our sin. Jonah, it seems, thought that the Ninevites did not deserve his or God's mercy. Jonah was angry for God having compassion on this wicked city. He, it appears, is self-righteous. He seems to have forgotten that he has just run away from God in his own life. He's forgotten God's great mercy on him. He's forgotten that God gave him a fresh start. In response, keep receiving and giving forgiveness. If we are to remain gracious and compassionate towards people, it's vital that we keep remembering how God has shown immense grace and has forgiven us. Remember how God gave his Son for us in our powerless and sinful condition. Keep confessing sin. Specifically, in our prayer times, keep confessing sin. Keep asking for forgiveness for specific sins. Keep giving forgiveness when people hurt us and anger us in our relationships. God bless you.